Hello. So I'm here today to show you some other options and other things that you can add to your database project. A lot of times kids are like, well, what can I do to, raise my grade, or what can I do to make it bigger or better? And that's what this video is for. It's just to demonstrate some of the options that are available to you. All right, so the first thing that we're going to look at is SQL. All right, so a lot of times kids want to start writing extra queries, but they don't know what to do. Well, most of the queries we focused on in class are all about pulling information out of the database. All right, you've already got the data in there. How do we retrieve it and look at it? But how does the data get in there in the first place? All right, like who's putting the data in there? Now, for your project, you're just typing it in. But if you're a big website or a big company, you're not manually typing in people's information. It's getting submitted automatically. All right. And that happens, again, through SQL queries. So one option you can have to improve your database is to write some queries that put data in, queries that modify data that's already there, and queries that delete data from your database. All right, so let's see how all of this works and plays out. So as far as creating the query, it's the same as always. So you would still go to create, you would still go to query design, you can still close out all of this stuff, and then you can switch over to SQL view. Now again, I'm going to write the query over in Google Docs just so it's easier to see, but eventually I'm going to copy and paste it back over here. All right, so the first thing is adding data to the database. All right, imagine you're on a website, you're filling out a form, you click submit. That submission is getting turned into SQL that's then getting submitted to the database so that your information can actually be stored on their system. All right, so instead of starting with select, when we're doing this, we're going to start with insert into. All right, so those are the keywords that we're going to use when we're adding information to our database. And then we have to pick what table we're inserting into. So maybe I want to insert into my user table. All right, so I could say insert into user. Now the user table has lots of fields in it, so I have to specify which fields I'm going to be entering data in. So I might say, oh, I'm going to insert F name, comma, L name, comma, let me see, what was the name of that other field? Username, all one word. Okay. Yep. So I've got a left parenthesis, and then I have each column name separated by a comma. So that should be L name, not just F name. Notice that I don't have user ID here. All right, user ID is set up as an auto number in the database, so I don't have to provide the user ID. That will get inserted automatically. So I'm just saying insert into user, which is the name of the table, and then the columns that I'm providing information for. And then I use the keyword values. And then inside of parentheses, in the same order that I specified here, I provide the values. Now, all of my values are going to be in quotes because all of these fields are text. All right, if one of the fields was a number, I would leave off the quotes. If one of the fields was a date, I would surround it with the pound sign or a hashtag. So I could just be like, oh, I'm going to add, Mr. as the first name. I'll add, let's see, who do we want to add here? Mr. Smith. And the username can just be M. Smith. All right, so again, I've got insert into, the table that I'm inserting into, the different column names, and then what's going into each of those columns. And then again, the order does make a difference there. So if I bring this back over to my query, all right, I'm going to paste it. And then I have to change the quotes just because of a weird Google Doc thing, but normally you wouldn't have to do this. So let me change all these quotes. All right. So if I go to this design tab and I click run, all right, I'll get a little pop-up. Now, if this was like an actual database, this pop-up doesn't happen, but it happens when you have Access open, which says you are about to append one rows, and then it warns you that it can't be undone. So if I click yes, and I go to my user table, you're now going to see at the very bottom there is that record that I just added with my SQL. All right. When you're doing these, make sure that you have the table closed. Like if I try to run this right now, it might not look like it worked. So like right now you're seeing just the one Mr. Smith. But if I were to close this and reopen it, you would see that there's now two of them because I've run it twice. All right. So if you want to make sure that it's actually working, you have to have the table closed and then reopen it. Or if it's open, just close it and reopen it, and then you'll be able to see it. All right. But that's how we can write SQL that inserts information into our database. Instead of just manually typing everything in, this is what a website would generate when you click submit on your form. And then your data that you put into the web page would get turned into an SQL query and then submitted to the database so that it was actually stored and processed. Okay. All right. Next thing, how do we update information in the database? All right. So we've got a record in there. We want to change something. How do we go about doing that? Okay. So instead of insert into, we are going to use the keyword update. We still have to specify the table that we're updating. So I'm going to say update user. All right. And then I'm going to use the keyword set. So again, this is a new keyword. And then I start saying what I want to change. So instead of fname equals Mr., because I have two Mr. Smiths, maybe I'll change one of those to Miss. And then so they don't have the same exact username, maybe I'll change the username to msmith2. Super creative. All right. Now, I can't just submit this query as is because then it would try to update every single record in the user table, which clearly I don't want because I don't want everybody to have the same username and I don't want everybody to have the first name. So to make sure it only does it for the record that we want, we have to add a where. All right. And this is where we limit what we're updating. Now, generally, we want to make sure that we're only updating one record. There might be times when we have to update a whole bunch of things all at once, but a lot of the times we're only updating a single record. So if we want to make sure we're getting a unique record, we're going to use the primary key because remember, every record has a unique primary key. So I can say where user ID equals, and then if I go back to my database here, I can see that the second Mr. Smith that I have is user ID 34. So if I go back here and say user ID 34, that ensures that it only updates that very last record. All right, so let me take this. I'm going to bring it over to Access. Again, I'm going to close this when I'm running the query. So update user, and then again, I just have to fix the quotes here quick. Right, and then if I go to the design tab and click run, I get this message that you are about to update one row, which will change just that information that I need it to change. So I can click yes, and it's going to update that. Now, really quickly, I want to show you if I get rid of that where and hit run, it's going to tell me that I'm about to update 32 rows, which I definitely don't want to do. So I'm just going to click no. But that's why the where is important there. It ensures that you're only updating the record that you actually want. So let me put that back in. User ID equals 32. And then if I go and actually open my table, you'll see that right here, we now have record 34 was updated. So now it says Miss Smith. and it says msmith2 instead of the original msmith that we had at the beginning. Okay, so again, another way that you can use SQL to modify and interact with the database. So again, you go into a website and you update your address, you update your phone number. It's not like somebody's getting an email and like going in and typing those in for you. All right, that request is getting turned into an update query. The update query is getting submitted to the database, and then your information is automatically updated. So again, just another use for SQL. All right, last but not least on this front is the delete query. All right, so this is when you want to get rid of something. So I could say delete from user. Now again, if I just did this, that would delete everything, which I really don't want to do. So where I can say, I can add a where statement, and I can say where user ID, oops, and if I have multiple ones that I want to get rid of, I could do something like where user ID equals 33, I think was the first Mr. Smith, or user ID equals 34. All right, and then that'll get rid of both of them. I could also use the in command here. I could say where user ID in, and then 33, 34. All right, so all the stuff that we've been using for wheres, I can use these, like the where isn't any different here. I can still use those same commands to interact with the database. So again, if I go here, I bring this over to my query. Again, I'm going to close the table. And then if I go to design and run, it's going to tell me that I'm about to delete 2 rows, which is right because I added the 2 Smiths and they were IDs 33 and 34. If I open this now, you'll see that they're gone. All right, they're no longer inside of my database. All right, so just another way that you can use SQL to interact. You can use it to add information to the database. You can use it to modify information in the database. You can use it to delete information from the database. So for your project, those are some extra queries you could write. You could write an insert query. You could write an update query. You could write a delete query. That's something you could add to your database. In addition, on the project sheet, I give you a link to the site W3 Schools. All right. And this is sort of an SQL resource site. They actually do it for a whole bunch of different languages, but we're using the SQL one. And if you look on the side here, it'll show you all sorts of different SQL commands and then examples of how they work. So this is another place you could go if you wanted to add stuff to your project. You could be like, oh, we didn't use select top. You know, what is that? So you could click on select top. It'll give you an explanation of what select top is and what it does. It'll show you some examples of what it looks like. And you could try to write a query that used select top, okay? And some of the different stuff there. Or maybe you want to use min and max, all right? Another thing that we didn't really do. All right, so there's all sorts of things that you can find on this site and use those to add them to your database, to add queries that maybe we didn't talk about. Those are things that you could do, all right? So as far as like options, you know, there's the insert, update, delete. There's coming to this site and finding things. I'm not really going to talk about it in the video, but if your database is larger, you know, we said 5 was the minimum number of tables. You could have more tables. And then the other thing that I mentioned is experimenting with forms and reports. So let me kind of give you a quick demo on how they work. So generally, a form is like a fancy way to type in your data. So if you think about web pages, how they have forms where you input your data. In Access, a form is like a fancy way to be able to input your data. And then the reports are like a fancy way to display your data. So if you think about like when you perform a search on a website, the results get presented in sort of like a visually appealing way. That's what reports do. Instead of just having to look at it in like a spreadsheet, you can fancy them up so the report, you know, the results look interesting and you're getting back something that's formatted and looks nice. So to do either of these, we go to create. All right. Now, we're not getting deep into either of these. So if you're going to try to do this, I would recommend either using the form wizard or the report wizard, right? Because those will set up the basics for you, and then you can go in and customize them from there. So let's say I wanted a form wizard so that I had like a fancier way to input the data in my database. So I could click on form wizard. It's going to ask me which table I want. So I could be like, oh, I want a table to input artists. And then it's going to ask me which fields I want to input data on. So I'm just going to put them all in there. So artist ID, artist name, artist bio, debut year. I'm going to go to next. It's going to ask me how I want it laid out. I'm just going to go with column here. It's going to ask you for a title. And then it either gives you open the form to view or enter information or modify the form's design. We'll start with this just so that you can see what the wizard makes for you. All right, so this is what the wizard automatically sets up. There's the field names, there's boxes here. Down here at the bottom, there's little arrows so that you can flip between the different records. And if you go to the very end, that's when you can start entering a new record. All right, you won't be able to type into artist ID because, again, that's an auto number. That just fills in automatically when you start filling in the other stuff. So this is what's generated automatically. Now, if that's all you do, it's not really a whole lot of extra work. But what you can do after that is if you go to design view, so right-clicking here and going to design view, or getting to design view right here, this is where you can start modifying the form. All right, so I can click on these things. I can start resizing them. If I go over here, there's the property sheet button. This gives me like all the different properties of whatever I'm clicked on. So right now I'm clicked on this artist ID label. If I want it to be larger, I could go in here and like change the font size and make it larger. I can start modifying it. Up here are all sorts of things I can add to my form. So in this design tab, whoops, if I wanted to like add a picture to it to make it look nicer, there's options there. There's if I wanted to add buttons, you can add buttons that do different things. So let's say I wanted to add a button. All right, I click on the button up here. I click down here, and then I can drag and make myself a button. And then it'll give me sort of this wizard to kind of create little buttons on the form that allow the user to do things. So I can make a button that brings them to the next record or to the automatically to the last record, or I can have a button when they want to add a record or delete a record or duplicate a record or print a record or save a record. I can have a button that just closes the form or prints the form. So there's all sorts of different things that you can go in here and play around with and add and just make it look more interesting. So again, once you've got this property sheet open, maybe I want to change the background color. So I could go in here and change it to this hideous yellow or something like that. But you can start going in and actually seeing what this looks like. And then if you go back to the design view, you know, there it is in my hideous shade of yellow that I picked. So again, this is something that you can go into. You can have the wizard sort of create one for you automatically. And then once you've created it automatically, you can then go in and start modifying it and changing it. And again, you're going to do that via the design view. And then you're going to want to have this property sheet open. All right, that's going to allow you to go in and start modifying different elements of the sheet. And then again, there's this toolbar up here. There's like insert images, there's buttons, there's all sorts of different things over here. If you hover over them, it tells you what they are. So like that's just a label, that's a tab control, that's a hyperlink. So you can go and hover over these different things and experiment with them. All right, I'm not expecting you to make like an amazing form, but if you want to experiment with them and just see what you can do, you know, that's something that I'll give you points for experimenting and trying something new that we didn't necessarily do in class. All right, now this is the form version. The report is more or less the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to close this out, and you would still go to create. Instead, you'd go over here to report wizard. Now with a report, a lot of times you're displaying search results. So you might do it on a table, but if you've written a query, you could also make a report from your query. I don't have any queries saved here, but let me make one really quick. Database, create, query design, SQL, select fname, comma, lname from user. All right, so super, let's select, let's do something different. We just did that. Artist name, comma, debut year from artist. All right, so there's my really simple query. I'm just going to save this as query one. So you can also create reports based on queries. So if I go to create report wizard, I can choose a table and do a report on a full table, or I can use my queries and make reports off of those. All right, it's going to pretty much look the same, but this is a way to sort of fancy up your queries and make them, look more enticing than just a spreadsheet. So again, I'm going to use the wizard. I'm going to go to next. It's going to ask you if you want to group them anyway. This one, there aren't really groups, so I'm going to just say next. It lets you automatically organize them if you didn't already do that in your query. So maybe I'll just organize them by artist name, and then you can choose ascending versus descending. Again, you can choose sort of the layout and how you want that to look. And then eventually it'll give you you'll get to the end of this and you can either preview it or modify. We'll start just by previewing it. So this is what it does automatically. All right, so that it's not just a spreadsheet, but it's more of like search results. And then again, I can right click here and go to design view. Oops. And then once I'm in there, start changing and modifying all sorts of things. I've got the same menus that I had before. I've got the same property sheet that I've had before. So I can go in here and start changing things to get whatever appearance that I'm looking for. So again, there's not one right way to do these. It just gives you a chance to sort of mess with things and experiment and just see what you can come up with. All right. Maybe you can get like this is not a good look, but it's an example of you can just start messing with things, adding pictures, customizing it however you want. So again, it's just another option. You don't have to do any of this stuff. But a lot of times kids want to know, what else can I do for my project? What else can I mess around with? And these are the things that you can mess around with. You can try to add some tables. If you started off with just the original 5, you can write extra queries, and that might involve just writing extra queries with the stuff we've already done. It might involve writing extra queries with the insert, update, and delete. It might involve going to W3 Schools and using that web page to write extra queries. And then the last option, or last two options, are messing around with these forms and reports. And again, I would start with the wizard to let that set up the basics, because otherwise it can be a little confusing to try to build it manually. And then once the wizard sets up the basics, then you can go in and start messing around with things and seeing if you can figure out how to get it to look a little better, look a little more interesting, maybe added some images or pictures and things like that, and go from there. All right. So again, I hope this was helpful. And as always, if you have any questions on your project, just make sure that you reach out. All right. Have a great day.